The reason for thinking Jesus existed is because he is abundantly attested in early sources.
There's also writings outside the New Testament which are relevant to this, which we can glean a lot about the historical Jesus as well, and show us that the early Christians certainly believed in historical Jesus, such as from Ignatius. And remember, he is writing in 120 AD. So that's early. This is early Christian writing, really early. What did he say? Be deaf toward anyone who tells you tales that do not lead to Jesus Christ, who was of David's lineage, Mary's son, who was born, who ate and drank, who was persecuted under Pontius Pilate and was crucified and died. Now, why is he doing that? He's interacting with a group of people called the Docetists. The Docetists thought that Jesus just seemed like a physical body, but really was sort of a phantasm, but he was still around, but it had to do with their view of the body. So he's interacting, but notice how it doubles nicely with the Christ myth theory because you have a very physical Jesus. Not only that, Justin, who some of his quotes are often misused in this debate, in his dialogue with Trypho the Jew. Oh, by the way, the Ignatius source was from his letter to the Trallians. Let me show you what Justin said. Quote, he grew up like any other man. He lived in a fitting way and granted each stage of development its due. He used all kinds of food. He was 30 years old, more or less, when John appeared, who heralded his advent, went before him on the way to baptism. In fact, Justin Martyr was under the impression, now whether he's accurate or not, we do not know, that the crucifixion actually existed in the official record still, the crucifixion of Jesus, because in his first apology, 35:7-9, he actually says you can reference them. Now, like again, that may or may not be accurate, but it shows you that their beliefs. Now, I could do the same thing with Clement of Rome as I did with Ignatius and Justin, but it just shows you that the early Christians aren't believing anything similar at all to what these Christ myths folks show, and it makes sense that they believe very similar, to put it mildly, in what we see portrayed in the pages of the New Testament, as well as in other history. So from Greek and Roman sources. Now, I view these as secondary. They're inferior, and they're merely meant to corroborate. Pliny the Younger, he lived from 62, 113, in his epistles to Trajan, writing around 112 AD. You see him, he was the governor of Bithynia there, and he writes about basically torturing some Christians, and information they gave him relevant, and in there include some historical references to Jesus. Tacitus, that's an extended section, 1544 in his Annals. This is around 115 AD. And then also Suetonius which I also have beside me. He wrote in the life of Nero about the Christians and their mischievous superstition. So these aren't folks who are really friendly to Christians. This is in 1611-13 as far as life of Nero. That's around 120 AD when he wrote. There's a smaller letter, Marabar Serapion, that we have, and it's later than 73 AD, but we don't know exactly the date of it. Most likely 2nd, maybe 3rd century, and he talks about the Jews who crucified their king, Julius Africanus, and he talks about this as well. And as far as what we have from Africanus, it's from 221 AD. But in his chronology 18, we have him referring to Thallus, who's referring to Christ in his death and all that. Lucian of Samosata, 2nd century, in the passing of I always mispronounce this, Peregrinus. I believe it's 11-13. You have some references there, and then in Celsus or Celsus, sometimes pronounced, via Origen, because we don't have his writings, but we have Origen who preserved Celsus' writings. You see evidence there as well. So that more gets, the reason I mention that is because that's still a secular source. If you talk about Celsus, now if you talk about Origen, it's not there. But you notice that's others as well. Also, you go over to Josephus, multiple places you have some references to Jesus in various ways. And that's really a good one. What do the Christ mythers have to do? They have to find a way to discount all these, and they find different ways to do all of them. And you start to scratch your head and say, why are you trying to discount all these sources?
Josephus makes mention of
I disagree.
And the thing is
because all you need to do
passage,
what's the other passage?
where he says James, whose brother is the so-called Messiah,
And I talk about that in the book
And I
at
know,
great length.
here's
At
why your
great length.
answer's wrong, because here's why. Because Josephus there says the brother of the so-called Messiah. You're trying to say that's another Jesus.
The same Jesus that's in the passage.
Here's the problem.
The same one that's in the passage.
Yeah, and how does he refer to that Jesus? By his father's name.
All
So
right.
you have to switch the guy from referring to his brother to his father to make it the same guy, but it's not. It's Jesus the Christ.
No, wait a minute.
Back like radio.
It's so not. Seriously. Seriously.
That is true.
That is not. You just have to read
Jesus
just
ben
read-
Ananias.
What?
Read the passage.
Josephus switches the indication in the middle of it. He calls him.
No one's claiming it teaches you everything you need to know about Jesus, but it clearly corroborates New Testament information, and you just try to discount them all to prop up your theory. The theory seems to be driving their interpretation of the facts. The Babylonian Talmud, this is a Jewish source. Now, this is later because it was collected 400, maybe 500 AD, but it has tractates from earlier times, such as Sanhedrin 43a, and one of the manuscripts of Sanhedrin 107b, which confirm John 19:31, Mark 3:22. In essence, you also have other examples of basically name calling Jesus within these later Jewish sources, where he's called a bastard, and Sanhedrin 106a and Yabamot 49a, which dovetails nicely with some of the things that Kelsus said via Origin. And so you see some of that. You see sort of the Jewish reaction to Jesus. He's also called a false prophet in some of these sources. In one of them, Barakat 17b, Sanhedrin 103a, Savet 116b, which may confirm Matthew 5:17. But what happens is, in every single one of those, the person promoting the Christ myth theory has to find some way to discount all the references to a historical Jesus. And it starts to become a very unsatisfying theory at that point, because you say, this doesn't seem to be really adequately explaining anything. It seems to be doing a dance away from any evidence. It seems to run away from evidence and have to dodge it and try to explain it according to the theory instead of really offering positive evidence for why this Christ myth theory is true. That's why it's not very satisfying. It's not a good theory at all. And if you apply the same methods, if you can even call it methods, that the Christ mythers use on historical sources, you would end up wiping out everything we know from the ancient world just about. Or what versions of this theory do you hear? Like, what kind of things are you hearing when you're dealing with it?
Well, when I first started getting into it, it was the Osiris, Mithras, Dionysus, Krishna, and all these things. And recently, I've been hearing more stuff of what you talked about and their double standards and so on.
Let me see. I mean, do you have any questions or other things to add? Because I've kind of went in on some of the.
I think you covered most of it. Just another ancient source would be Suetonius, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. So here's Suetonius, Lies of the Caesars, from Claudius, the Life of Claudius, and it's in 25:4. And here's what it says. The Jews he expelled from Rome. By the way, of course, that in itself is a big deal, because that directly confirms Acts 18:2, which speaks of that actual event. So notice you have multiple corroboration with the Christian sources there. The Jews he expelled from Rome, since they were constantly in rebellion at the instigation of Chrestus. And so it appears there are some problems going on, and Jesus is getting blamed. Now, you could see, because of the alternation in the spelling, Chrestus, that's where you get places where they try to get rid of it. But it's clear that it's Jesus.
Yeah, I like how Frank Turek says it. It's not the New Testament that inspired the Christians. It's the Christians that made the New Testament and what they saw, and that's how we get the New Testament.
Right.
Because of what they saw.
So, I mean, you see from, multiple sources, you got example of example. And so you say, why would someone say Jesus didn't exist? You hear these guys, they act like it's the new wave, like it's a new fad. Like
The myth of Jesus, though, the story points have been duplicated throughout in different civilizations.
Yes.
In 1400s, 1500s. Like, there are different people who were born, they say, on December 25th, who were born Immaculate Conception to a virgin, who died on the cross and was resurrected on the third day. All of the different points of Jesus' stories have they've been also associated with other people in history.
Bad, like everyone's going to start thinking it, but I don't think so. But that's the kind of the way they talk about it. They're certainly confident, but they should spend more time dealing with, I think, other types of scholars on this issue and other sources. I think they'll be less convinced than they are, hopefully.
Well, I think they need to fix their epistemology and methodology, and actually take a lesson in history and so on, and how that works. But their theory lacks all three of those.
So yeah, I mean, and you'll notice if you read Tacitus, Suetonius, and Pliny, you know, I've got Pliny here. You'll notice that there's like, you know, they sort of match in sort of the Roman view of Jesus and the Christians, you know, between the information that they've got about him and the kind of things that they say. You'll notice that. So we kind of get the aristocratic view of Jesus in a way. You know, you see this corroboration with what we see taught in the New Testament. So the Christ myth theory doesn't really deal with sources like this. It ends up dealing with hearsay about some ancient cult, and then they summarize it in a Christianized way to make it sound like it's a parallel to Christianity without really giving you all the information. That's why it's not very convincing once you look into it. A lot of times it can be convincing upon first blush because you hear them say, oh, this God was born on December 25th. Half the time it's not true. Second of all, it's irrelevant because the Bible nowhere states that Jesus was born on December 25th.
Study the religions of the Mediterranean region for 1,000 years before. Many of the gods were born on December 25th. It's not a new one.
It's not. Or they'll say he had 12 followers, and there'll be some painting with the deity with 12 stars around him or something. And it's like, you're interpreting that as 12 followers? So they'll try to parallel with the disciples. And they'll say, oh, it was born of a virgin, like Mithras. Mithras was born of a virgin? You look into the source, it says Mithras emerged from a rock wearing his cap with, I think, the knife, which he would slay the cosmic bull. Well, I guess you could say the rock was a virgin. It probably had never had sex before. But if we're going to classify rocks as virgins, where are we going to stop? So that's the type of stuff you get a lot of times when you deal with this. And this is why most people who know something about this think it's a bad theory, because it skews the way the person interprets the data in an unrealistic, silly kind of way, because the Christ myth theory seems to be the driving force of how you look at evidence, and it just really distorts your view of history really badly. And I didn't even mention everybody. You know, I didn't go into Flagon of Tralles. I didn't really go into Julian the Apostate. I didn't go, you know, into these other attestation by non-Christian sources. I didn't go into the other Christian sources. I didn't go to the other parts of the New Testament. But, you know, you could take these gods that they supposedly draw parallels with one by one and just debunk it.
It shows their lack of research, and actually they're taking broad statements and presenting it to people who don't know much about it or who lack apologetics. And that's why the church needs information like this, because otherwise Christ myth theory is going to deconvert most Christians, because they're going to end up thinking, oh, Jesus Christ never even existed.
Religulous opened in theaters. Thank you. In 2008. Back then, only 16% of Americans identified as non-religious. Now it's 26%. You're welcome.